Hi. Hi, Emily, Sarah, Jeffrey. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes. Hello.
Yeah? Hi, I'm
Yes, we
Cynthia.
can see you.
Great. I'm Cynthia. And yes, first of all, I want to thank you for your extraordinary film and for being here. It's a very important moment. Besides the fact that the film is very important, it's very important to have you here too. Let me just give some technical details to our audience about asking questions, and then I'll come back to you, okay? So if you
Sure.
need to ask questions, you have on the screen slido.com, and then you have a code, and you can tap your questions there, and I will receive them here, and I can transmit them to our guests. So, yeah, thank you. I am quite overwhelmed by the film, I must say. And I wanted to start by the project, the beginning of the project. And I noticed, for me, it was very clear and important, actually, that the whole film is a journey where facts and separation from between facts and mythology or symbology, as someone says in the moment, and at the same time the removal of the ideas of guilt and concentrating on ideas of collective collaboration and moving forward. So ideas of trying to find strategies and language to move forwards. And I found that particularly not just productive, but exceptional. And I understood that the idea of pedagogy of the project lays very much on this notion and importance of fact and history based on facts, but also on this notion that we collectively did this and we collectively need to move forwards and find ways of being better. So I wanted to ask you how, for you, what was the moment when you decided to turn this project into a film? Because a film goes beyond your appearances, Jeffrey. It goes beyond your country. It expands the conversation and globalizes the conversation.
Yes, and I think Sarah is the person to best answer that because if Emily and I think, had to vote, we would blame Sarah for starting this because she's the one that roped us into it.
Um, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you, audiences. We're so excited that this film is playing before a live audience, by the way. This is the first theater that we've done a Q&A in. So we have not had the pleasure of seeing the film with an audience, and this is our next best experience. So thank you to everyone in the audience tonight. I was an audience member, like all of you. I am a lawyer, and as part of renewing my legal license, I have to take these really boring classes, continuing legal education classes, and I saw an ad for one that was free at my local courthouse, and Jeff was speaking, and I didn't pay much attention to it, but I needed it for my license, and I didn't have to pay money to go, so I went. And I heard Jeff speak in a conference room to a room full of lawyers, giving a condensed version of his talk, and I basically fell out of my chair. Hearing Jeff break down the history of 400 years of anti-Black racism and white supremacy in the United States changed my life. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't look at the world the same way ever again. I couldn't. It had implications for every aspect of my life, and I knew it was something that I wanted to share with other people. And since my sister Emily and I are filmmakers, I had the ability and luxury to use film to do that. So I immediately called Emily and I said, we're making this film, and you know, she's my sister, so I get to tell her what to do sometimes. And and that was it. We started moving forward. We're lucky that Jeff said yes.
So, and Jeff, you are not talking specifically to a Black audience, obviously. It's very obvious that you are trying to reach out to the Confederates, the people who are celebrating the Confederate States, the people who are believing that in white supremacy, the people who are not thinking about it, but living and getting the privilege of it, right? Do you believe, and I also saw that you do have, like, this project goes beyond the film, right? There's a website, there's directed to educators, etc. Do you think this is something that needs to go to the grassroots of society and needs to be transversal, and it's a pedagogy process? It's an educational process. Do you believe that this is something that needs to be translated into other levels of society, institutions, etc.?
I think the broad answer is yes. This is a story that's not intended for any particular segment of the population in America. It's intended for every single person in our country and, quite frankly, around the world. I think there are parallels that obviously can be drawn with experiences in other places. But this is an American story, a uniquely American story, just because of where it occurred and how it occurred. Uh, and to suggest that only Black people need to understand this or only white people need to understand this just doesn't make sense, because this history was stolen from all of us. And it will take all of us to recognize that fact and to change course. And I think what you are seeing in America right now, in terms of a backlash against films like this and education based on films like this, people are afraid that if the truth is taught, the next question, and that's what really scares people, is, oh my God, well, if that's the truth, what do we have to do about it? And that starts to impact privilege, that starts to impact money, that starts to impact corporate structures. But I think America is ready for this discussions. I think there are people in corporate boardrooms around America that are ready for these discussions. That's why you have educational institutions trying to enter into reparations agreements like Georgetown University, because of their acknowledgement of how much they profited from the institution of slavery. You now have corporations that are looking at their behaviors. And so I think this mess took America 400 years to create. And so it is going to take individuals, corporations, and the government to turn this to a direction that it needs to go.
I have 3 questions already from the audience, so I will start by the first. What was it like working with Benga Akinagbe? He is a brilliant actor, and I did not know he was involved in this kind of production.
I will say that Benga worked with us on the production on Juneteenth. The talk that I gave, that was the backbone of the film, and it was wonderful working with him. He is an actor, and so for the other actors who read parts, historical parts in that presentation, seeing him work with them to get those parts down was wonderful. We didn't use those parts in the film, but it made the presentation just fantastic.
Since the recording of the film, what are reflections on the current situation in America?
I don't know who should take that, Jeff. I mean, since the recording of the film, we feel the urgent need for the film and the urgent need for this conversation. We're in a place in this country where there has been a strong backlash against the 1619 Project and teaching the true history of the legacy of slavery and of anti-Black racism in this country. A moment where we have state legislatures passing laws to try to rob our young people of the true history of their country. So, you know, while we were making the film, while we were editing the film, George Floyd was murdered, Breonna Taylor was murdered. You know, since we finished the film, you know, these murders by police officers have continued. We had Dante Wright murdered during the trial of George Floyd. So we feel this is a dialogue that the United States needs to have, and that if we can't honestly engage these issues now, then we may lose the opportunity to ever honestly engage these issues.
And that's one of the reasons why we chose that Jeff gave, that was the basis for this film, on the screen at the end, so you could see that everything that he is saying, as relevant as it is today, was said over 2 years ago now. It was, and where, you know, this film has been seen by, I mean, hundreds of people, not very many at this point. You know, you're some of the first people who have ever seen it. And we're all very excited for more people to see it, so we can begin to become part of that dialogue that we know is so important to be having in our country at this moment.
In other countries.
And I think I just want to follow up quickly to say that Emily's right. This film was recorded, and it's almost 3 years, Emily, because it's Juneteenth, 2018, and we're just 10 days away from that or so. And when we talked about the concept of the tipping point, it's important to understand that when you look at something like the history of a country, a tipping point isn't just a moment or like a day or a week. It can be a number of years. And America is still at this tipping point, and it's not clear which way we're going to go.
So I am having a flood of questions. Okay, so I'll try to. You told your story beautifully. Thank you. What is the most powerful thing a white ally can do to help others understand their white privilege?
And I'm not sure I heard all of the question.
I can repeat. You told your story beautifully. Thank you. What is the most powerful thing a white ally can do to help others understand their white privilege?
I think there are a number of things that people can do, both in America and internationally. And one of them is to arm yourself for conversations about these topics. And when I say to arm yourself, I obviously don't mean with weapons. I mean with facts. I mean with information. Because while there are some people that will try and shut their minds to it, one of the things the cameras didn't show in South Carolina is that there were people standing around watching. And I don't know what those people thought about what they heard. But when you can challenge people's concepts about why things look the way they do today in 2021, that's the way that you get people thinking about a different path forward. And so I think there are a lot of folks who are afraid of the truth. And by arming yourself and informing yourself about this kind of history, you can start to chip away at that in your community, in your family, in your workplace, in the organizations that you belong in.
Another question. Thank you for creating such a powerful film. You mentioned there is backlash to films similar to this. Did you face many challenges in the production of this film? Emily,
why don't you tell the story of the horns in Alabama at the Edmund Pettus Bridge?
Well, I would just say that it was very important to us that we make this film independently, without you know, signing up with any distributors or anybody or any broadcasters early in the process at all, because this is Jeff's story and we wanted to make sure that he had total control over it. So, you know, we made that choice to not, you know, get in bed with any other organization too early, so that they could have that kind of influence that we knew we just couldn't accept. But what Jeff was referring to, and we were filming at the Edmund Pettus Bridge, that sequence with the senator by the bridge when he's talking about the power of symbolism. It was a very hard shoot that day, because there were at least 2 cars that kept going around again and again and stopping at the intersection, just laying on the horn, trying to prevent us from being able to record. It was We were lucky we got what we did. I edited the film, so it was sort of a nightmare editing scenario to try to cut around all of those horns. But we managed. You can still hear them, but we managed to still get something very powerful. Also, the gentleman that Jeff speaks with at the memorial to the Confederate soldiers. There were 3 men there, and they followed us to our next event, where Jeff was speaking at another Confederate statue that actually has since been torn down. And they followed us there and just stood there in the crowd, you know, right in the front with their arms crossed, just, you know, with their mere presence, you know, intended to intimidate. So there are stories like that, but we weren't deterred, and you know, and those men have no power. So you know, we were still able to create the film that we made.
We had the same experience at the Hanging Tree in Charleston. We had
Yeah.
cars that would go by and kept idling and going by. When we were with Tammy Sawyer at the Nathan Bedford Forrest Memorial in Memphis, Tennessee, we had, I think, kind of a police car, or more than one police car, waiting, you know, on the corner, just kind of watching what we were doing. And Commissioner Sawyer told us that frequently when she's there, she has the experience of being intimidated. And you know, this intimidation, you know, we felt it making the film, but the real people that face this intimidation are some of the truth tellers, history makers, and activists that we filmed. You know, while making this film, this is a backlash that is part of their everyday lives. Right now in Memphis, Commissioner Sawyer is facing death threats. And the reason she's facing death threats is because of a community-wide activist-led effort, first to take down the statues, but then also to move the remains of Nathan Bedford Forrest and his wife from that site to another location. So, you know, what we experienced was minor compared to what Commissioner Sawyer and others experience.
Of course. So while we have the economic political system that finds racism useful, do you think anything can really change? And I would expand from this a little bit. And I mean, you talk about, Jeffrey, in your conference, you talk about, yeah, right, this all sounds reasonable. The question is how it will touch people, right? People have to give away some of their privilege. And it has to do, I mean, we have read texts about the connections between capitalism and the slave system, right? And the origins of capitalism being completely rooted in the slave system and the cotton plantations. So would you say that to have a progress towards an anti-racist society, we need to deeply question capitalistic society?
Capitalism is a major contributor to this entire problem, and I don't think anyone can deny that. The question in America is it possible with a system, and let's be clear, America is not a pure capitalist system, because there is all kinds of government involvement with the economy to advance the position of certain people and organizations in the economy. It just so happens that all of that work tends to advance people and organizations that are white and have been established for generations and centuries. I think the question in America is, within the system that we have, is it possible to move toward racial justice? And for me, the answer is without question. If America tells the truth when it says we've got some of the most brilliant minds in the world in the area of business and science and innovation, well, if somebody said to those brilliant minds, your number one goal for the next 3 years is to design systems that are going to make it possible for Black Americans, as well as other people of color, but this is a film about Black America. Design systems that's going to make it possible for Black America to improve its economic status. Design systems that's going to make it possible for home ownership in Black America to double in the next 10 years. How could you do that? Design systems where you, big corporation, just take a look at the sheets from your company about where you buy stuff. Everything from paper clips to the highest level consultants. Where are you spending that money? Who are you spending that money on? If we decided that we were going to take American ingenuity and make this country a more equitable place for Black Americans, there's no question in my mind we could do it. And of course, the trick is, or the funny thing about it is, and I say funny sarcastically, the funny thing about it is, if we actually did that, the entire country would rise in terms of its level, both of economic status, in terms of peace in the country, in terms of well-being in the country. Everybody would benefit. So to me, it is not an issue. Capitalism is clearly a problem, but I am not prepared to say that within the system currently existing in the United States, it's impossible to make radical changes, because it is. It's just a matter of political will.
I think maybe we've lost our connection.
Yeah, I think, do we have to try and sign back in maybe?
I don't know.
Okay,
I mean, we can
no
still see
problem.
each other. Okay.
Sounds like Jeff just got some insight.
Yeah.
Yes, he just said he'll explain in a moment. I didn't know if you guys could hear that. Oh, no problem. I know I can be heard, folks, there, but I'm just telling Sarah and Emily that the microphone on stage ran out of batteries, and so they're replacing it, and they'll be back with us in just a minute.
Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes.
We can hear you.
We can hear you now.
I'm really sorry. So, a couple more of questions. So, first one, do you view protests as the most powerful tool to bring about large-scale change?
This is Emily speaking. I think that we think that education is the most powerful tool to bring about change, and that's why we made this film. We think that information and education. We think protest is powerful too, but people need to be armed with the right information even when they go out and protest. So I think we definitely feel like it's education and information and, you know, in the true history of our country.
And Emily and I also, we're the children of radical lawyers. And our parents strove to make change in the courtroom. But even when they were working to make change in the courtroom, they always felt that the courtroom follows the streets. You know, what happens on the streets, the protests, the tide of the moment, is what changes laws. It's what changes countries. So we do believe in the power of protest, and hopefully through education, we can get not only inform people who are already out there protesting, but give more reason to people to protest.
And let me just say one final thing about that. George Orwell said, "Who controls the past controls the future." If you wipe the truth out of the past, then when people look at it for explanations about why things look the way they do today in June 2021, they don't have anything to understand why it's happening today. And this is why there is such a strong effort to push back against the information in this film. This film would be illegal to show in some schools in America. That's why the effort pushing back against this kind of information is so strong, because the people pushing back against it, they know what will happen if this information gets out and if this information starts to get into the discussions in America. They know that things that they rely upon are going to start to fall apart. So they want to keep this education as far away from people as they can. If there's anything that tells us we've hit the right nail on the head when it comes to education, it's the reaction of people that don't want this to happen.
Actually, there is one question related to what you just said, Jeffrey. So, first a comment. It's from Sylvia Harvey. Thanks to Jeff for your generosity in guiding this film. In Britain, we are making slow progress. Are US high schools doing more to shift the dial?
The Who We Are project is going to be aggressively engaged in. How is this history being taught in our high schools? We are going to try and engage across the country with school boards, with teachers, with parents, with students, so that we can have an impact. And the impact, you know, there are still states in this country where you can't teach the history that's presented in this film. There are other states in the country where you can not only teach it, but where it is welcomed and people are thirsting for it. So I think we are just, you know, America has been in a culture war for quite some time. And to me, this is just about whether we're going to tell the truth or whether we're going to rely on a myth. And I just want to make it clear, I consider myself a patriot. I consider myself, despite what America has done, for some reason, I still love the country. But to me, the word love means not that you tell lies about the past, but that you actually tell the truth. And the word love means if you have screwed over a section of your population, then you acknowledge it and you make it right. And the word love means you go forward together with a knowledge of your past so you don't repeat it in the future. So for anybody that says this film is an attack on America, I say the exact opposite. This film is, I believe, the most patriotic thing that I've ever done.
I have one very, very quick question for you. It's last. We should be finishing now, but I cannot stop myself from asking it. I think the film, I mean, I understand that the film is about America, and I do respect that. At the same time, the film has an impact, and it is a global conversation. It's impossible not to acknowledge that. My feet are now in the UK, right? We are having a conversation in the UK. I come from Portugal, two of the countries that most profited from slave trade historically and who have invented this system. So yes. I wanted to ask you, And this film, I'm sorry, and when I was watching the film, I was thinking, this is more than just a question of losing privilege. This is an identity crisis for many of these countries and for the spine of these countries, right? And so what would be the advice that you give, or not advice, a suggestion, a provocation that you give to these countries, which are at the starting point of this story, right? For their future conversations.
You know, I'll say this quickly, and I'd love to hear what Sarah and Emily have to say. Sarah and Emily are brilliant, but they are not unique. There are Sarah and Emily counselors in every country on this planet who are capable of telling the stories of those people in those locales and how their culture developed and did or did not rely on white supremacy and racism. And so these stories, it's why this is called a chronicle of racism in America and not the chronicle of racism in America. I felt like the story I could tell was about the experience that I have had as a Black American. But there are people, you know, I'm glad that people feel my story's powerful, but once again, it ain't unique. These stories are everywhere. And it is by telling these stories and by people becoming their own historians to have folks in the world today confront and understand what brought us to this point in America, in the UK, in Portugal, wherever. That's where we go forward with actually the ability to solve problems because we actually recognize what caused them. We can look at our history and find out what caused them.
Part of the reason why Jeff and Emily and I connected so strongly is that we all do believe strongly in reclaiming the historical narrative and in the importance not just of primary source materials, but the importance of unknown stories. We have a canon of history that is written by white people, celebrating white people, and and hiding the stories of people who aren't white, and hiding the stories that make white people look bad. And we know that that's true not just of our country, but of every country with a white dominated, you know, populace and government and history, right? Any colonial power. So, you know, part of what we, you know, what Jeff is talking about is, and that we encourage is don't just go and look at the primary sources of your country, but look at the untold stories. Start local, start in your community, go to your local graveyards and libraries and look at the stories of people who have lived, your ancestors, the ancestors of other people who have lived through the slave trade and the colonial period that followed, and find out those truths. And it's in learning those truths and in bringing those unknown voices forward that we can all start to reckon with this and heal together.
Very much.
Yeah, I mean, our film is 2 hours long. You know, we could have made a 7-hour-long film. Jeffrey's presentation is 3 hours long, and he still, you know, could go on for a day and a half. You know, there's a million stories out there to be told, and as Jeffrey says, you know, you don't have to dig too deep. This history is lying in plain sight, and it's the responsibility of all of us to uncover it, and when we do, to share it.
Very much. And thank you for your extraordinary work and for sharing it and continuing the project. And I really hope it has a huge impact, and we want to help on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for staying, and I encourage you to explore the Black British film retrospective that we have put together that has films, for example, by Menelik Shabazz and other filmmakers who have told stories that we all need to know about this society and our present, because it is also about our present. Thank you.